Hey everyone, hope everything's going well. Figured we better move on with history, and I guess this is the best way we can do it. So, Civil Rights Movement, topic 9. There's two types of segregation. There's segregation in the South, it's by law. Remember, the restaurants, restrooms, buses, all that stuff was by law. Plessy versus Ferguson upheld that. That was the big case, if you remember, all the way back with like the William McKinley time period. Separate but equal, as long as facilities are equal, segregation is constitutional. But we all know that was not always equal. De facto segregation was in the North, and that was usually by custom and tradition, just kind of how it was. African Americans weren't treated great, but it was still better than what was going on in the South. In the South, it was horrible. Does anyone know who this is? Jackie Robinson is correct. First African American Major League Baseball player. Um, there were several African American organizations that we talked about during World War II. CORE was one of them, Congress of Racial Equality. James Farmer was one of the leaders of it. And again, they're trying to fight an end to racial injustice. Again, there's Jackie Robinson. Any of you ever see the movie with Jackie Robinson? It's pretty good. Does anyone know who the first Cleveland Indian is that was African American? About 2 weeks later, came after Jackie Robinson. Larry Doby. Thurgood Marshall was the first African American Supreme Court justice. Worked for the NAACP, had death threats at a constant rate. There's a really good HBO one-man show in regards to him. Several court cases that came during this time. Sweatt versus Painter. Talked about violating the 14th Amendment. If you remember, we talked about it after civil rights or the Civil War. And this was a big civil rights one. You'll still hear about the 14th Amendment today because of the Equal Protection Clause. McLaurin versus Oklahoma. They allowed a guy to actually go to school, but then he couldn't use the library, dining hall, classrooms, anything associated with the school. Then the big one, this is huge, Brown versus Board of Education. This will overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. And basically it said separate was not equal. Therefore, they had to change it. But years went by and nothing really changed. Earl Warren, who was very conservative for the time, surprised a lot of people because he was very liberal with his civil rights. Hernandez versus Texas was first case outlawing discrimination versus another race other than African Americans, where Mexican Americans were not allowed to serve on juries. This case would allow them to now be on juries. Brown versus Board of Education 2. Again, they must, with all deliberate speed, integrate the schools, but that would again take years. Southern Manifesto, so many Southern politicians in Congress were really frustrated with everything that was going on. They signed a petition against the Brown case because they believed in segregation. If you've ever watched Forrest Gump or Remember the Titans, you could see a lot of tension based on segregation and integration. Orval Faubus, he was governor of Arkansas who tried to prevent 9 African American students from entering Little Rock Central High School. Famous scene in Forrest Gump right here. You see the hate on this woman's face. But this was a legitimate situation. They had to have federal marshals to protect some of the students. It still didn't stop a lot of discrimination, hate. I mean, you can see the people lined up in the streets, just like in Remember the Titans. President Eisenhower had to send in troops. He had to tell Orval Faubus to stand down, otherwise he would be arrested. So this became a federal versus state thing. Civil Rights Act of 1957 protected African American civil and voting rights. Had to make sure African Americans were allowed to vote, they could vote, is trying to get rid of the poll taxes and the grandfather clauses and literacy tests, all those types of things. And then this was the thing that started the mass movement across the country. Rosa Parks was arrested. She refused to give up her seat on a bus. They actually wanted another African American woman to do this, but she had a criminal background. Rosa Parks had a completely clean background, nothing wrong with her. So it was kind of staged, but she did have a lot of sacrifice associated with this. So it began the Montgomery bus boycott and the civil rights movement officially. Then you will hear Dr. King, who's pictured in the bottom right. He will start to emerge as the leader of the civil rights movement. You can see over here in the left picture, white waiting room only, a lot of tension. African Americans made up a majority of the bus usage. So if they had a boycott, the bus system could go down the tubes rather quickly. So that's why successful movements are ones that usually hurt businesses economically. So they would carpool, they would ride bikes, walk, whatever it took so they didn't have to use the bus. So Dr. King's the man. 1929 to 1968. 1968 will be considered one of the worst years in American history. Dr. King will be assassinated. Robert Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, will be assassinated, and the Vietnam War will take place. Ralph Abernathy led the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Dr. King will also be a part of this. If you are in Mod 3-4, email me and tell me about this slide, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That will be your in-class participation grade. So they would basically use the church as their meeting ground. This will be kind of the foundation of everything that they would do during this time. Nonviolent protests, that's what Dr. King wanted. After some time, there will be several groups like Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, that believe nonviolence is not the way because nothing was getting accomplished. Greensboro, North Carolina, this began the sit-in movement. This was supposed to be a whites-only lunch counter. African Americans could work, but they could not sit there as customers. Therefore, these guys would be harassed. They would be arrested. White customers would come in. They would dump milkshakes over their heads, drinks, take cigarette butts, put them in the back of the African Americans' necks. It would lead to some Caucasians or white people sitting here too in protest, trying to support the civil rights movement. But this began a sit-in movement across the country. Ella Baker helped organize the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, so a lot of college-age kids would be a part of this. They also were protesting segregation on buses and bus terminals. So the Freedom Rides would allow them to travel around all throughout the South. Mod 1112, this is what you need to tell me about if you watch this for in-class work or grade. So they had to put federal marshals on the buses because of the violence. You can see in the top right picture, buses were stopped and caught on fire. The bottom right shows where they traveled all throughout the South. James Meredith was a young Air Force veteran who wanted to attend the University of Mississippi, or Ole Miss. He did have to have federal marshals protect him. Eventually, I think the next year, he was walking and someone shot him, and this is a photograph of him being shot. He survived, but I think in the 1990s, he would later have succumbed to major injuries and would eventually die. Medgar Evers helped James Meredith get in the University of Mississippi. He's like the Dr. King at the Mississippi level. There's a really good movie called Ghosts of the Mississippi that's in reference to this. I highly recommend it. A lot of people like it as much as Cinderella Man and some of the other movies that we've watched. Birmingham, Alabama, the most segregated city in the South. If you're a mod 1516, you need to note that and email me to tell me that you've seen this. Since it's the most segregated city in the South, dogs were going after protesters. This isn't just a normal hose, this is a fire hose. If you've ever been sprayed with a real fire hose, it's difficult to stand up. I mean, this guy's kidneys are probably being bruised because of that. Dr. King was obviously there. He wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail justifying nonviolence, just like Gandhi did in India. He was trying to promote nonviolence. This is what we had to do. This is what direction we had to go. We can't go away from it. Eventually, he would have his famous March on Washington, where he would deliver the I Have a Dream speech. Hundreds of thousands showed up. Again, Forrest Gump, there was a famous scene during this time against the Vietnam War. In Birmingham, Alabama, there were 4 African American girls on the church steps, and the bomb went off. Pretty much assume it was the KKK, but 4 African American girls were killed as a result. JFK would eventually be assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson would take over. Lyndon B. Johnson will try to continue on JFK's promotion of civil rights, and he will be kind of the guy that leads the way. Congress, the Senate in particular, did not like some of these civil rights acts, like in this case of 64. They would filibuster, where they would just talk and talk and talk and try to delay a vote. You can see, I mean, they've read things from the phone book to the telephone, anything you can think of, cookbooks, you name it, just to delay a vote. Now you can take a vote to end the filibuster and have an immediate vote on whatever topic it would be. EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If you remember, that was established during World War II to make sure there was fair hiring. Freedom Summer, this is a massive campaign to get African Americans registered to vote so they could vote. The Democrats were kind of divided a little bit, and Fannie Lou Hamer led the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She threatened not to have a nomination for the Democratic Party, and they needed those delegates to vote. So she would kind of get her way a little bit and have a little bit more influence in the Democratic Party. Selma, Alabama, there was a movie, Selma. It was a March for Freedom. They were specifically told, whatever you do, don't go over this bridge. If you do, you will be arrested. There was tear gas being shot at the protesters. It was complete chaos. Voting Rights Act in 1965 would later be passed, which officially banned literacy tests. Again, Mod 3.4, you need to tell me about literacy tests. Remember what we took in class? That's your big thing. So tell me that you saw that in an email for an in-class participation point or 2. 24th Amendment would ban poll taxes, so now you don't have to pay in order to vote. Baker versus Carr tried to balance out voting so African American neighborhoods weren't so isolated, basically, and their vote didn't matter. So this was trying to make sure there's equality in voting. We still have a major issue with gerrymandering today, when you can redraw the district lines. We had several race riots going on. Watts neighborhood, Detroit, Michigan. That was another big one. Watts is actually in Los Angeles. Newark, New Jersey was another one. I mean, they were setting the place on fire. They had to call National Guard in. They had a curfew at night. So it's pretty much like what we're going through with coronavirus, to stay at home. Kerner Commission, probably one of the most useless commissions ever created. They were trying to figure out what was going on during this time and why there was a need for the civil rights movement. Why was there so much hatred? And they found out after they investigated that a lot of the stuff was decided by racism. So the race riots occurred because of racism. Malcolm X had enough. He was one of the leaders that was outspoken. He believed if someone hit you, you hit him back. He believed in segregation. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. And this is the slide that 11, 12 you need to tell me about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So he was a member of the Nation of Islam. Eventually, he decided that maybe that wasn't right for him. He broke away from the Nation of Islam. He thought, well, wasn't sure if Dr. King was right or not. They disagreed. Elijah Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam. And soon after, Malcolm X was assassinated. So he was the next guy to be assassinated. Stokely Carmichael. He believed in the Black Power movement. These guys down here were Olympians. They were told specifically this is a political protest. If you politically protest during the Olympics, which is supposed to be free of politics, you will have your medals taken away. They did with the Black Power symbol, and they were all over the news because of it. So they felt getting attention that way for civil rights movement was better than winning a medal. Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, they would begin the Black Panther movement. Again, if you watch Forrest Gump, that was a big thing. So they openly brandished weapons. They had guns. They were walking through neighborhoods. They believed in segregation. They believed if you were attacked, they were attacked, then you should be attacked. There's a Poor People's Campaign in Memphis, Tennessee. There's strikes going on, group of African Americans, I think they're garbage men, that were struggling, and they wanted help. So in Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King goes down there for their support, and James Earl Ray assassinated him. There's Dr. King moments before he was killed. James Earl Ray was across the road. There's Dr. King down there. I believe his jaw was blown off. He was out there smoking. They're pointing at where shots came from. James Earl Ray actually made it up to Canada. He was trying to fly, I believe, to Europe, and he was eventually captured. He claimed until his death that he had nothing to do with this. He was set up. Conspiracy theorists believe there's more to this situation, but that's all we know. So he was arrested. His brother, James Earl Ray, was interviewed and said he absolutely could have shot and killed Dr. King. Robert Kennedy, again, 1968, was killed as well. Sirhan Sirhan was the assassin. Robert Kennedy was running to be president of the United States. This was years after his brother was already assassinated. He was in California giving a speech, stepped off the stage live on TV. Sirhan Sirhan assassinated him. He also claimed that he had nothing to do with assassination. I mean, he was definitely there. He was arrested. He claims he was brainwashed by the CIA, and he's still alive today and still claims he had nothing to do with this. Dr. King wanted the Fair Housing Act to be passed. He pushed for it. So in his honor, there were new housing developments created for African Americans that would be affordable. There was forced busing. So this didn't last very long, but what they were trying to do was take black communities and bus some African American kids to white communities, and white communities have them bus to African American communities. People just refused to send their kids to school because you might be traveling for hours to get to school. So segregation was not prevalent. So they're trying to integrate them, and that just wasn't going to happen. Affirmative action. This was to give preference in the event of a tie to any minority. So if I had a 36 ACT, 4.5 GPA, and there was a African American kid with the same exact criteria, he would get preference into Harvard or whatever college. And that is all. So this is what 1516 you need to tell me about affirmative action. So email me 2 things. Have a good one.